Today we're going to install a ProMoto Billet cargo rack on this 2014 KTM XCW. So as you read in the instructions, this installation does require you to cut your fender and your airbox, just little portions of it. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, go ahead and have your dealer install this rack for you. So we have a top, we have two sides, two brackets, 4 other clamps, all the bolts we'll need. We have our templates and our instructions, so we're ready to roll. Okay, I'm going to show you some of the tools that you're going to need for this installation. I'm going to use the basic tools so that most people will have these in their toolbox. If you have more sophisticated tools, go ahead and use those. You'll want a rubber mallet to be able to tap things into place. I used a couple different styles of files for this installation. A razor knife with a nice sharp blade, a pair of scissors for cutting out templates, some needle nose pliers, some blue thread locker, removable thread locker, an 1/8" drill bit and a straight edge. A ratchet set, there's a 6, an 8, and a 17. Some tape, Allen wrenches, and a drill, and a 5/8 drill bit. Now if you don't have a 5/8" drill bit, you can go ahead and use a razor knife and just cut that hole into that plastic that you need. So step 3 is where we'll actually start, and it says remove the seat by removing the bolt underneath the rear fender. It's right under there. So we have an 8mm socket on an extension. 4 is to remove the bolts that hold the muffler on and remove the muffler. Five, remove the airbox covers on the left and the right hand side. So that's these two pieces here. Okay, so the left side just pops off, easily removed. Allow the rear fender removal by pulling the bolt here on the left. 2 underneath. To remove the rear fender, the main bolt here that the seat also bolts into, we'll use a 16mm socket and remove that fastener. Step 7, remove the 2 screws securing the back of the battery box, one there and one there. And all we need to do is loosen them up so that we can rotate that battery box up out of the way for the next step. Okay, so now the battery box can be moved around a little bit so that we can get the brackets in on the next step. Okay, so we're going to locate bracket A and bracket C. Bracket A goes on the left side of the rail, just right down next to the battery. So we push the battery box out of the way and we slip bracket A into place. It's going to be a little snug, which is going to be a perfect fit. Then we take bracket C and install it on the right hand side. It's easy to also tell there's a little chamfer right here to make room for these welds around the subframe brace there. Push the battery out of the way, push that bracket into place. If the bracket's a little too snug, use a little gentle persuasion to help get that on there. We do want it really tight onto the subframe so that it is a good secure mounting bracket. 9, locate template A and carefully cut it out around this perimeter. It says fold along this line. We will find out shortly why we fold along that line. So if we fold that and get a good crease going there, This is our first template. We'll go lay it out on the plastic and show you where to cut. So if you look in the picture number 4, you'll see where the template is laying on the plastic. That's on the right side of the bike, right here on this number plate. We'll line it up. That fold line goes right on that line right there. You put the top edge of that paper template on the top edge of that plastic. Tape that in place. Make sure that we're following this edge of the plastic. Get that lined up. And tape that into place. Okay, so now that the paper template is in place, we're going to mark the location of the center line of this hole that we're going to want to drill. So just using a sharp knife, just X marks the spot. And then you'll want to mark the outside edge of this section cutaway into the plastic so that you'll know where you want to cut once you remove that paper template. Okay, so you can see underneath I now have a spot to drill my hole and the location of where I need to trim that plastic out. So on the front we will essentially cut away that entire tab across this line right there and right there. Now that we have the lines marked in our plastic, we've removed the paper template and we're ready to cut out the small triangle right here. Since this plastic cuts fairly nice and I have a brand new sharp blade, I don't really need to use any heat, but if it's hard to cut, a little bit of heat on that blade will really make it a lot easier. So you can use a pair of pliers to help you grab the plastic and cut any little sections that might not have been severed. Okay, so that's the top layer, and you really only need the hole to be through that second layer. Okay, so there's the plastic trimmed, both the front of template A and the hole that you'll need for that bracket to go in place. Okay, step number 10, carefully cut out the paper template B and template C. So we're going to cut them out. There's B and there's C. So there we have it, template B and template C. Okay, if you look at picture number 5 in the instructions, you can see where template B goes approximately about right there. And template C So there's template C taped on. Template B, we lay it on there, top edge, right on the edge of that plastic. Get it lined up. Okay, so the next step is to, using your sharp knife, mark the location of the cut line in the plastic so that you can see where to cut it off. So I've got that marked. And then mark the center line of the hole that we're going to drill. Cut right along that line to remove that piece, and then straight down this edge. So that's template C cut out, and then we'll drill the hole right there for template B. Now, hindsight, I probably should have used a drill over in this other side to drill that hole, but it is possible to do with a nice knife in case you don't have a drill bit that's big enough. The hole for template B is 5/8 of an inch. So if you have a 5/8 diameter drill bit, go for it. The next thing you need to do is locate bracket B and bracket D. You install bracket B onto the left-hand subframe rail. Push that plastic down out of the way. You can install that about where that hole is that you just drilled. Again, we'll slide it as far forward as you can. There's a weld on the bottom side of that subframe that may interfere. So you get it as far forward as you can. Snug it into place. Bracket D is the one with a little cutout on it, and we'll put that on the right-hand side, just behind that brace that comes up. Okay. Now if you notice, this bracket doesn't want to go on straight. It doesn't want to straighten out for me, and it's a really tight fit in there. And the reason is there's a weld right here. So I may need to grab a file and just file a little bit of that weld back. Each bike is a little bit different, so your bike may not need that, but this one will, because this bracket needs to fit in there and go flush. And it's just a little bit off. Okay, so to keep filings from going down into my air box, I'm going to put a piece of paper towel in there so that as I file, the shavings go into that rag, not down into my air box. It would not be good for your motor. Look at that, now it sets pretty flush. We have step number 11 complete, so let's move on to step 12. It says install arm C, item number 4. Check that the number plate does not interfere with the arm. Slight additional trimming may be required. Bracket D is a tight fit and will establish the location for arm C. So let's find that arm C. Okay, I'm going to install this bracket right there, but I can already see that I don't have enough room back here. I didn't get my hole quite big enough, so I'm going to go ahead and trim a little more material around to provide clearance for that boss. As you install the bolts on this cargo rack, remember to use some removable thread locker. It's typically blue in color, is the removable kind. Just a little dab will do you. So put a little bit on each bolt as you do the install. Okay, we're going to install arm A on the left-hand side of the bike. We'll loosely install those bolts. Note that I did use some Loctite on those. Okay, so now that I have arm A loosely installed here, I need to align this bracket and that bracket, bracket C and bracket A. A needs to be 1/8 of an inch in front of bracket C. Right now it is not. I should be able to take a 1/8 inch drill bit and drop down in that crack. So I'm going to grab my little mallet and gently move that bracket so that it is 1/8 of an inch in front . There we go. You notice I'm not taking my straight edge and putting it in front and touching the terminals on the batteries. That would be bad news. Number one, that terminal should be covered up. So make sure that you put your straight edge behind on bracket C across and check that bracket A is about 1/8 of an inch in front. A little bit of blue Loctite. And install that 8mm bolt into that bracket. So now that this clamp is 1/8 of an inch in front of that clamp, we've got these bolts in, we install this 8mm bolt, and we go ahead and tighten it up. Replace and tighten the 2 bolts that hold the battery tray in. So that's these 2 bolts down in here. 16, we're going to cut out paper template D and paper template E, and then we'll tape them on the plastic. We're going to take template E and stick it on the right-hand side of the rear fender. And notice you just follow the contour line of that fender and match it up with all the lines all the way around. This box is where we're going to cut to allow the rack arm to go through. So we're going to tape template D to the left side of the rear fender. Okay, now that we have our templates installed, we're going to go ahead and mark the plastic where we need to cut. This is template D, so we're going to go ahead and mark the plastic where we will want to cut. Again, this is an approximate location. This particular plastic is aftermarket, so it may have a hair different contour to it, so we may have to do some modifications once we get that plastic cut out. So on template D, you're going to cut there, and you're also going to cut this little flap away that tucks up into the other mating piece of plastic. Be very careful not to cut yourself. So we've marked that plastic. Okay, so that's that location. We'll go ahead and mark the other side. Now this tab just gets a little bit cut away. that's marked. And that's marked. So now that I have those marked, I'm going to go ahead and trim that tab back. What this actually does is provides clearance for the brackets that we installed. So if you go to put your plastic back on and it's not quite there, just trim a little more off. It should do it on that one. Use a little rocking motion, it just kind of cuts through there like butter if you have a sharp knife. Again, be very careful not to slip. Should take care of that. Remember, when these rack arms go down through, they're going to go down perpendicular to those rack arms. So we're going to go straight down. I would like to point out that I'm doing this with a knife because most people have a knife. I could use a rotary Dremel tool or something like that, which we do have. But if you don't have one, it doesn't do you any good for me to show you how to use one. This is probably the hardest part right here, because I want to be careful to not make the hole too big, because I'm pretty particular about how that hole looks when it's finished. So if anything, I want to be a little bit under. That's just my personal preference. And then I can always carve a little bit more out. So measure twice, cut once. Whoo, there it went. So there's your hole. So to test if your hole is in the right attitude here, you can try to drop that down in. See how I'm on an angle right there? So I need to trim off plastic down in there so that I can get that to drop straight down in. Again, we don't want to get too carried away until we get it on the bike to make sure it's in the right spot. So we're carving the right side. Since I have the rear fender extension on this fender, I need to get template F and cut that out, and I need to trim back this edge so that it will clear the bracket. So I'm going to do that now. Trim template F. Okay, I'm going to remove the rear fender extension so that we can trim the little piece of plastic off so it will clear the rack arm. Just a couple bolts here. And it pops right off. I've got template F cut out, taped on there, so I'm ready to mark where that needs cut away. Trim it away. Harder. That one's hotter. So now I'll trim it away. Use the back edge of that plastic as a little bit of leverage. I'll reinstall the rear fender. Step number 19. Now that we have our brackets installed and our rear fender trimmed up, we're ready to install that rear fender. Got to make sure everything is in the right spot, just in the right place. Remember, if you have an electrical wire, to make sure that it's in the right place. Slip that fender back into position. Make sure to reconnect your electrical. Electrical's reconnected, you'll put your bolts back into place and tighten that fender down. Is it supposed to come up through? Okay, so I'm having a hard time getting the seat bolt, the seat assembly deal up in there far enough and getting that on. So I think part of my problem is this plastic isn't quite in the right place. I need to go further forward with the plastic. So I loosened these two bolts so that I can try to get that forward a little bit more. The problem is when I assemble that rear fender, it's tilting that bolt forward. So as I'm putting the fender on, I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting it far enough forwards so that this bolt will line up. So I'm looking right here and I see a little bit of interference with these brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and trim a little bit of plastic away here so that that will fit better. I'm going to trim that back too.
So this is the original part that we trimmed. We're going to trim it a little bit more.
I'm going to trim a little more, just to make sure that I'm not hanging up on that. Okay, so the problem that we had was the two sets of plastic when they come together, that fender and then the one-piece airbox side panel, the two holes weren't lined up perfectly. And so when we're putting that fastener in, it would rock it forward and not allow it to come through the hole all the way. So really what we did was we just got two people, had the cameraman put the camera down and push the two plastics into place so that we could get the fastener into the right place. So it just wasn't lining up quite right, just in that location.
So it was a pull here,
push there, pull, and get those two holes in the plastic lined up so that the fastener would go through them. Then we'll install the rest of our bolts. One there, one on this side, and two underneath. So now that we have the rear fender back in place and bolted on, we need to test the slots that we cut in the rear fender to make sure that the rack arm will go in. So this side looks pretty good. The other side was a little tight. So this side's pretty tight. So I'm going to just use the couple of tools that I have. I have a little file and a knife. So if you need to make some more clearance, you can come in and trim the plastic back a little bit more using a knife, or you can also take a file and file that plastic away to provide more clearance. Okay, so now that we've ensured that the slots in the plastic are the right size, we're going to install the rack arm down into those brackets that we previously installed. So that one fits in nicely. And that one fits in nicely. Okay, so now that we have the rack arms installed, we install the 2 button head bolts to hold those rack arms onto the brackets. A little bit of Loctite. And we'll do the one on the other side now. Okay, now that we have the rack sides installed, we can go ahead and install the rack top. You simply place the rack top on there. You may have to pull the rack sides in or out a little bit to get them to drop on in the right place. Should drop on there. Then we install the 4 flathead bolts that hold the rack top onto the rack sides. We want to make sure we use a little bit of Loctite. There. Now the rack is completely installed. Now we can go ahead and put the rest of the seat and the plastics back on. Once you're done, before you put your side covers on, you want to make sure that any plastic shavings or filings are out of your air box. So you might blow it out, clean it out with a rag, whatever you need to do to make sure that there's no particles floating around in there. Then you'll go ahead and install your side covers. Go with the left first. So now we'll install the right hand side cover. It's held in with 2 screws, one in the top and one in the side. Now we're going to install the seat. Okay, you've now completed your Promotobillet cargo rack installation. We hope it gives you years of service and reliability. Thank you for purchasing, and check us out at promotobillet.com for other great products for your bike.